Now we'll get to the business matters at hand. To give our keynote address, Understanding the Humanitarian Ecosystem, please join me in welcoming to the stage Nicholas Horton, the Diplomatic Advisor for the Near and Middle East for the International Committee of the Red Cross. Mr. Horton.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be with you this morning and to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Kızılay. But before I begin, I'd like to congratulate the organizers of this event, especially on this wonderfully designed auditorium and the videos and the colors. Very excellent job done. Makes all the difference. I've come from the headquarters of the International Committee of the Red Cross in Geneva, and I bring with me the very warmest wishes to Kızılay from our directors, from our president, and from all our ICRC staff, wishing Kızılay the very best as it celebrates this significant anniversary. There are two things I would like to do this morning. Firstly, to recognize the valuable work carried out by the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, of which Kızılay plays a key role. Indeed, even more so since the election of Dr. Kerim Kinnik as Vice President of the International Federation. And secondly, I'd like to say some words about what has become known as the Humanitarian Ecosystem. Ladies and gentlemen, as you may know, my organization, the ICRC, stands at the origins of the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, a movement based on the principles, amongst others, of humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence. We helped create the Geneva Conventions, which form a central part of international humanitarian law. We work closely with national societies, Red Crescent and Red Cross, in a complementary way. We focus on trying to help people affected by war and conflict. Kızılay also stands at the very origins of our great movement, coming into existence less than 5 years after the creation of the ICRC itself. Just like the ICRC, Kızılay was born on the battlefield, serving the medical needs of sick and injured soldiers, Turkish and others, in the Crimean War, the same war that saw the work of Florence Nightingale and confirmed the place of modern humanitarian action in international relations. The deadliest killer then was infectious diseases, which took the lives of thousands of soldiers and required the development of hospital medicine near the battlefield. Kızılay was the first to take up the noble emblem of the Red Crescent, a sign that's worn today with pride by millions of Red Cross volunteers around the world. The Red Crescent and the Red Cross remain signs of mercy and compassion, signs of relief to those who see them, signs that somebody cares and that help is at hand. Over the years, Kızılay has developed exceptional areas of expertise. It was an innovator in humanitarian medicine 150 years ago. More recently, Kızılay became an innovator in large-scale humanitarian response as you welcomed millions of refugees from the Syrian crisis. You rose to this difficult challenge. Kızılay also became a world leader in using cash transfers in humanitarian action. You've pioneered scale and technology here too. You've embraced modern methods of humanitarian response, and in doing so, you've made the lives of millions of people better and more dignified, and you've earned the respect of the whole international community. Kızılay is also expanding its contribution when responding to humanitarian needs in other countries, and we praise the efforts to partner and engage more with other movement components. Every generation, unfortunately, has its own particular humanitarian tragedy and crisis. The special crisis of this generation has been in your region and in your neighborhood. And the people and professionalism of many have risen to meet this challenge. Your spirit of action and your spirit of innovation have seen you move fast and expand to show humanity to millions of people whose lives have been torn apart by war. So my first job today is to thank you, Kızılay, for the significant and long contribution to humanitarian work in Turkey and beyond, and the important role you play in our movement. My second task is to talk about the humanitarian ecosystem. As I've already mentioned, 150 years ago, the ICRC, Kızılay, and a few other national societies were at the very beginning of modern humanitarian system. Today, as a movement, we're part of what's become known as the humanitarian ecosystem. This expression, humanitarian ecosystem, was first taken up by the movement here in Turkey, in the great preparation meeting of national societies convened by Kızılay in advance of the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul in 2016. In the run-up to the summit, there was concern across the movement that the UN would overemphasize a single global humanitarian system and a single system that could be easily designed, controlled, and coordinated from above. This idea of a single top-down humanitarian system didn't feel right to our movement. It didn't feel right to our Red Cross and Red Crescent sensibility for three reasons. It didn't feel right because it was too mechanistic. A humanitarian system conceived as a complicated clock or a sophisticated car engine, which was subject to the control of a master clockmaker or a master mechanic. We all know that humanitarian response is not this simple. It's also about humanity with its compassion and emotion, its spontaneity, and its creative outbursts of compassion among people. Humanity emerges and breaks out. It's not just designed and controlled. Secondly, it didn't feel right because it seemed too Western, a system driven mainly by the power and control of Western states. But we all know that humanity is driven by everyone, in every state and across every culture. The humanitarian system could not simply be a Western system. Finally, it didn't feel right because it looked too blue. The single humanitarian system seemed to be designed in the image of the UN and its agencies. This didn't feel right to our older, more local, and more voluntary Red Cross and Red Crescent system. We know that humanitarian response is the work of many different colours, not just blue. We also know that humanitarian response is deeply local and often led by first responders, not by international agencies. So we all needed a more accurate idea to describe global humanitarian action. Hence, we all agreed to use the more biological and less mechanistic idea of an ecosystem. This imagines global humanitarian response as a living system and not a mechanical system. It's an environment or a landscape with a great diversity of living organisms which cooperate together, consciously and unconsciously, to make a balanced environment. So the humanitarian ecosystem is like a Turkish hillside in spring, in which rain, rich soil, warmth, and sunlight enable 100 different grasses, flowers, and weeds to blossom and make a perfect ecosystem in which a wide diversity of small animals, insects, and birds all thrive. This is very different to a privately owned square field, which is mechanically ploughed, precisely seeded, sprayed with pesticide, carefully overseen by its owner, and in which a single cash crop grows. The Turkish meadow is a beautifully balanced ecosystem, full of many good things. The farmer's field is a highly organized field, full of one good thing. The ICRC and the Red Cross Red Crescent movement prefer the vision of an ecosystem for global humanitarian response because of this main difference in approach, and because an ecosystem values and encourages four things that are particularly important to our movement. Firstly, diversity. The model of a humanitarian ecosystem desires and encourages a diversity of humanitarian actors and response. It embraces volunteers, community-based organizations, local and national government, volunteers and professionals, religious and secular groups, international NGOs and national NGOs, businesses and non-profit groups. It's in this mixture that different perspectives will generate subtle understandings of people's needs, and different skills will discover innovations across many sectors. This diversity will protect humanitarian action from becoming stuck in one box, dominated by one group and fixed in its ways. The price may be a little more chaos and a little less coordination. Second, local power and local action. An ecosystem model is also respectful of local humanitarian action and not biased to international organizations. If an ecosystem is working well, it should see clear value in local and international actors who should be in the same meetings, discussing the same problems, and entitled to the same types of financing and funding. Thirdly, partnerships. Ecosystems thrive on cooperation more than control. Different organizations need to cooperate to keep living systems alive. This means sharing power and resources and avoiding a winner-takes-all attitude that aims at scale and growth for a few big beasts. There can be bigger animals, but these must not ruin the environment for smaller ones and must make it better in important ways, just as a giraffe eats from the higher leaves of a tree and leaves the lower ones for other animals. Partnerships mean teaming up to combine complementary mandates, resources, and expertise in a way that makes the overall humanitarian response better for people. This commitment to partnerships is at the heart of our movement. Fourthly, people-centered. Most important of all, an ecosystem model of global humanitarian priorities, model of global humanitarian response prioritizes the needs of the whole population and not the needs of humanitarian organizations. A diverse humanitarian ecosystem should always have people in the affected population as its main priority. It's these people who must be kept alive and thriving, and this can only be achieved by a diversity of actors and skills, a complementary mix of local and international action and creative cooperation between humanitarian responders. I think the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement knows deeply that an ecosystem model is the best approach for global humanitarian response and cooperation. It's a model that we have seen to work in almost every humanitarian emergency. The ecosystem model doesn't reject coordination and control, but creates it in a balance of top-down and bottom-up humanitarian energy in which everyone has a stake in the good performance of others. It's control by cooperation and not control by command. Ladies and gentlemen, the humanitarian ecosystem was developed and agreed as a model of global humanitarian response in the meeting of national societies here in Istanbul, and one was then taken up formally by the World Humanitarian Summit in May 2016. The ecosystem model is born of the insights of 150 years of humanitarian action in a great variety of crises, and it's essential that our great Red Cross, Red Crescent movement models an ecosystem approach which encourages diversity, local action, and partnerships that put people's needs at the center of humanitarian action. Thank you for inviting the ICRC to be with you on this special day, and all of us at the ICRC wish you at Kızılay another 150 years of humanitarian success. Thank you.